It happened on a Tuesday evening. Her mother leaned across the table, wine glass in hand, and said, "Jason, you used to smile more when you looked at her." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it cut deeper than anyone realized. Dana chuckled too, but she didn't look at me. I remember the taste of cold potatoes and the silence afterward more than anything else. That's when it hit me. I wasn't part of this marriage anymore. I was just a witness. My name's Jason Carter. I'm 39. I work in logistics managing warehouse operations in a small corner of Phoenix, Arizona. I've lived here nearly half my life, and I've been married for close to 6 years. Dana and I were that couple everyone said had potential. We planned, we worked, we shared goals. I renovated our entire backyard myself, laid the pavers installed, the lighting built the deck. Every nail, every screw, I thought I was building something that would last. In the early years, we were in sync. We talked about starting a family, buying land, building something together. Not just a life, but a legacy. We weren't flashy or romantic in public, but there was a quiet trust between us. That kind of thing doesn't come easy, and once you've had it, you don't expect it to vanish. But looking back, the unraveling wasn't sudden. It was slow, subtle, like a house settling into its foundation, until one day you realize the doors don't close properly anymore. It started during our third year when we first began trying for a child. Dana and I both wanted kids badly. We tracked calendars, counted ovulation days, and consulted specialists. There were hormone injections, early morning lab visits, and a growing file folder filled with disappointing test results. Each month started with hope and ended in silence. That silence began to stretch into every part of our relationship. I noticed Dana changing. She grew quieter, pulled back from intimacy, and began sleeping facing the wall. I thought it was just stress. I told myself it would pass, that once we had our baby, things would click back into place. But she started avoiding the fertility appointments altogether. She gave up not just on that dream, but I sensed on us. Conversations grew shorter. Dinners felt obligatory. The house, our home, felt heavier every day. And in all of this, what hurt wasn't just the distance. It was her indifference to it. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being unseen by the person you share a bed with. I was no longer her partner. I was a fixture in the house. I told myself real love meant staying. That's what commitment meant. But I didn't know then that loyalty when unreturned becomes self-erasure. That night at the dinner table, when her mother made that offhand comment and Dana didn't defend me, didn't even glance my way, I realized I wasn't imagining it. I was fading, not from her life, but from mine. One morning I woke up before the sun. The room was quiet, too quiet, and I could hear her breathing slow and steady, with her back turned to me like every other night that month. I reached out instinctively to touch her shoulder to maybe bridge the gap. She flinched, didn't say a word, just got up and went to the bathroom. That's when I realized you can sleep next to someone every night and still feel utterly alone. It's strange how absence can grow in a space that's technically full. Donna was still there. She still cooked sometimes, still folded the laundry, still replied when I asked where the car keys were. But everything between us had turned transactional. There were no jokes, no affectionate touches, no shared glances. It was like we were business partners operating a house. I'm not naive. I knew things wouldn't stay like they were in year one. Life changes. People evolve. But what nobody prepares you for is the quiet grief of being ignored by someone who once memorized your coffee order and your favorite shirt. I missed being noticed. I missed being missed. I tried to fix it. I initiated conversations, suggested weekend getaways, tried to re-spark intimacy. Dana would nod, maybe agree, but the light in her eyes never returned. Her answers felt like exit signs. I remember suggesting we take a day off and go hiking, just us. She said, maybe another time. I have errands. Errands. She didn't want to talk about therapy. She said she didn't need someone to analyze her. I asked if we could try again with the fertility treatments, and she said, I just don't see the point anymore. We were still married on paper, still shared bills, still posed for the occasional holiday photo with family. But inside the house, I started feeling like a tenant. I stayed in the garage longer. I volunteered for overtime. Not because I needed the money, but because it hurt less to be anywhere but home. I began talking to myself more, narrating my thoughts in the kitchen or humming to fill the silence. That kind of thing creeps in when you're lonely, but still pretending not to be. I convinced myself for a while that I was overreacting, that maybe I was just too sensitive, that men like me aren't supposed to need emotional closeness. But we all do. The worst part, she didn't even seem to notice the man she once called her safe place was unraveling right in front of her. There's a moment where a person doesn't have to say they've checked out, you just feel it. The warmth is gone, and in its place is a quiet disinterest that suffocates you one indifferent glance at a time. I stayed because I believed that love was enough, that if I waited long enough, she'd come back to me. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't holding on to her. I was holding on to a memory. She showed up late on a Thursday night. It was raining, and I remember the knock on the door sounded harder than usual. When I opened it, there was Dana's sister Riley, soaked through mascara, streaked down her cheeks, two kids half asleep and clutching snack wrappers. "Can we crash for a few nights?" she asked without waiting for an answer. Dana pulled her in without even looking at me. That was the moment everything started to collapse. Riley had just separated from her husband. From what Dana told me, it had been ugly. Yelling matches, restraining orders, a whole scene. So of course I said yes. I wasn't heartless. I figured a week, two tops, just until things calmed down. But Riley didn't treat it like a temporary arrangement. She unpacked everything, shoes, toiletries, toys, like she was settling in for the season. The guest room was full within 3 days. Soon her kids' drawings covered our fridge. Their stuffed animals migrated into our living room. I found a juice box under my pillow. Not once, 3 times. I tried to be understanding. Divorce is hard. Single parenting is harder. But it didn't take long to realize that what I thought was temporary was becoming the new normal, and I had zero say in it. Dana never discussed a timeline, never checked in, never once asked me how I felt about it. I didn't want to be the villain, but the weight of unspoken frustration started eating at me. Riley wasn't a quiet guest either. She had a mouth on her, always throwing out sarcastic remarks. One night I came home and she was sitting on the couch, legs up on our coffee table, drinking from my favorite mug. "Jason, you look exhausted," she smirked. "Rough day playing warehouse Tetris," Dana laughed. I didn't. The kids, bless them, were pure chaos. Screaming at 6 a.m., fighting over tablet chargers, leaving crayons melted into the carpet. I started sleeping in the den just to get away from the noise. Dana's response: "They're just kids. Lighten up." It wasn't the kids, though. It was the feeling that I no longer had a say in my own home. I was tiptoeing around their messes and my own resentment. Every time I brought it up, Dana brushed it off. "Riley has nowhere to go," she said. "Would you rather we leave her on the street?" That wasn't what I was saying, and she knew it. I wasn't angry because her sister needed help. I was angry because I didn't matter. Because the woman I married didn't see that she'd chosen her sister's crisis over our crumbling relationship. I was becoming a guest in the very house I built. And for the first time, I started thinking not just about leaving the marriage, but about disappearing altogether. I came home one evening to find Riley sitting in my recliner, feet propped up, laughing at something on her phone, while the kids were throwing cereal at each other in the kitchen. Dana was on the patio scrolling through her own screen, earbuds in. No one looked up when I walked in. I stood there for a moment holding a grocery bag like a stranger who'd knocked on the wrong door. That's when I realized I didn't live here anymore. I just paid the bills. The tension had become unbearable. Riley wasn't just overstaying her welcome, she was acting like she owned the place. She made snide remarks about everything I did. One time I cooked dinner for everyone, and she joked, "Wow, Jason's actually useful for once." Dana laughed. I didn't. There's a special kind of sting when your partner laughs at your expense. It tells you exactly where you stand alone. I tried setting boundaries. I asked Dana if we could talk privately one night, told her that I was feeling overwhelmed, disrespected, even pushed out. She didn't respond with concern, just frustration. "She's my sister Jason," she said. "She's going through hell right now. Don't make this about you." But it was about me, about us. We were slipping through the cracks, and I was the only one trying to hold the frame together. Every day after work, I'd pull into the driveway and sit in the car a little longer, just breathing, preparing, hoping maybe tonight would be different. But it never was. Dinner was loud and chaotic. The kids had no rules. Riley dominated every conversation. Dana and I barely spoke unless it was about bills or scheduling. I started sleeping in the basement, not because there wasn't space in the bedroom, but because there wasn't space for me in our life anymore. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing upstairs, and that laughter, the kind that used to fill me with comfort, now made me feel like a shadow. One evening, Riley said loud enough for everyone to hear, "If Jason vanished tomorrow, I bet no one would even notice." And Dana. She didn't defend me. She added to it, "He probably wouldn't even leave a note," she said with a smirk. They both laughed. That moment stayed with me like a scar. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. They wouldn't notice. I had already become invisible. So I stopped trying to be seen. I stopped bringing things up. I stopped fighting for attention, for fairness, for dignity. I wasn't just losing a marriage, I was losing myself. And something in me started to shift, not out of anger, but from a quiet clarity. I didn't want to fight anymore. I just wanted peace. I didn't leave the night they mocked me. I didn't storm out, slam doors, or make some grand announcement. That's not how things ended between us. No, I did it in silence, bit by bit, like a man quietly backing out of a burning room without waking anyone up. Because at that point, I wasn't trying to be right anymore. I was just trying to breathe. The next morning, I opened a drawer in the garage and pulled out a few moving boxes I'd kept from years ago. I labeled them with vague terms, seasonal storage donate, just in case someone asked. Inside, I packed only what mattered: old family photos, important documents, some clothes, and a few keepsakes that reminded me of who I used to be. I found a small self-storage place about 30 minutes outside of Phoenix. I paid cash, used a variation of my middle name for the rental. It was the kind of place with no cameras, no questions, and a rusty padlock system that made it feel invisible. I moved my boxes there slowly, one or two a week. Nothing that would set off alarms. Then I opened a new checking account under a different version of my name. Transferred small amounts into it, just enough to survive, but never enough to be noticed. I bought a prepaid phone and kept it in my truck. I even started researching smaller towns, places with a slower rhythm where I wouldn't bump into anyone who knew me or my past. All of it quiet, calculated, intentional. I never told anyone, not even my closest friend from work. I think deep down I didn't want to explain. Didn't want the pity, or worse, the advice to stay and talk it through. There was nothing left to talk about. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I stopped hoping for change. I stopped waiting for Dana to turn around and notice the growing distance between us. She didn't, and I no longer needed her to. What I needed was to leave without causing more wreckage. To exit the stage without anyone noticing the understudy was already gone. I planned it all down to the hour. The bag I'd take, the cash I'd carry, the route I'd drive. There was no drama, no shouting, no guilt. Just a quiet resolve. This chapter was closing, and I was the one holding the pen. And still, despite everything I'd endured, despite being erased in my own home, part of me kept hoping. Hoping that one morning I'd wake up and she'd look at me like she used to. That she'd reach for my hand without me asking. That she'd say, "I miss us." But she didn't, and I stopped expecting her to. So I packed, I planned, I prepared, and I waited for the exact right moment to vanish. The smell hit me before I even reached the front door. Charcoal smoke, grilled meat, and that artificial lemon scent from those plastic tablecloths you only pull out for parties. I heard voices, laughter, kids squealing. For a moment I thought maybe I had the wrong house, but it was mine, and nobody had told me a damn thing about this barbecue. I stepped inside. Music drifted from the backyard, and I followed it to the sliding door. Dana was there laughing with her parents like nothing was wrong. Paper plates piled high, someone at the grill, kids running wild, and not one face turned to greet me. I stood there for a second, unsure whether to be amused or offended. "Hey, Jason," one of Dana's aunts called. "Grab those drinks, will you?" I nodded and forced a smile, stepping into the scene like an extra on someone else's movie set. I hadn't been invited. No one had called. No message, no heads up. I wasn't even an afterthought. I was a background fixture. As I handed off the tray of drinks, one of Dana's cousins leaned over and asked, "Where have you been?" "This thing's been going for hours." I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could say anything, Riley's voice cut through the noise. "If Jason disappeared tomorrow," she said loudly, "I don't think anyone would even notice." Laughter erupted, not the awkward kind, the genuine kind. Dana didn't flinch. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look my way. She added, "Honestly, I didn't even realize he wasn't here." That was it. I looked down at the plate in my hand, half a hot dog, a few chips, and the last trace of my tolerance. I raised the hot dog like a toast and said quietly, "Challenge accepted." A few people chuckled, thinking I was being funny. But I wasn't. That moment, small as it might seem, was the tipping point. I had spent months silently packing, preparing, and planning for my exit. That night gave me the final permission I didn't even know I needed. Not from them, from myself. When the last guest finally filtered out and Dana was in the kitchen tidying up, I went upstairs and grabbed the duffel bag I'd kept hidden in the back of my closet. Just the essentials: clothes, my laptop, cash, and signed divorce papers. Before I left, I placed those papers right on the kitchen counter where she'd see them first thing. On top, a yellow sticky note with just 4 words: "You noticed yet." Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, got in my truck, and didn't look back. No calls, no second thoughts. I drove into the night free for the first time in years. I didn't tell a soul where I was going. No calls, no notes beyond what I left on the kitchen counter. Just one bag, a full tank of gas, and a plan I had memorized down to the last turn. I wasn't running away from a fight. I was stepping out of a life that no longer felt like mine. If disappearing quietly was the only way to be heard, then silence would be my loudest message. That night I drove west for hours, passing through towns that blurred into one another. At a gas station in a place called Hartford Springs, a dot on the map north of Prescott, I tossed my old SIM card into the storm drain behind the pumps. I didn't just delete my presence, I erased the version of me that had accepted feeling invisible. I had already prepaid 3 months' rent on a cabin I found through a dusty classifieds website. It was owned by a retired veteran who didn't ask questions as long as you paid in cash. The place was simple. No Wi-Fi, no TV, no neighbors in sight. Just trees whined and a porch that creaked like an old song. I unpacked the essentials, set up a small folding desk, booted up my laptop, and logged into the anonymous freelance accounts I'd been quietly building. Within days, I was back to working online design jobs, proofreading gigs, nothing glamorous but enough to eat and keep the lights on. No clocks, no schedules, no footsteps overhead. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. The hardest part wasn't the silence, it was resisting the urge to break it. I didn't check social media, didn't peek at old texts. I knew that path led nowhere but back to everything I'd left behind. I didn't want to be found, and I sure as hell didn't want to explain myself to people who had spent months pretending I didn't exist. Still, solitude has a way of unearthing things you buried deep. I started journaling, not because I wanted to remember, but because I needed to understand. How had I let myself stay that long? Why did I wait until I was hollow to act? Over time, the questions stopped feeling like accusations. They became answers. I slept better, ate cleaner, started going on long walks. I wasn't hiding, I was healing. I told myself I wouldn't reach out, wouldn't check in, wouldn't look back. That promise held strong for 8 months. Until one day I logged into an old email account just to recover a forgotten file and found her there. Dozens of messages, all from Dana. I hesitated with the cursor hovering over the unread emails. Part of me wanted to delete them all without a glance, just highlight, select, and wipe the slate clean. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, especially when it comes wrapped in someone else's regrets. The earliest messages were exactly what I expected: angry, demanding, wounded. "You had no right to disappear. How could you be so cruel? You're a coward." She said she'd take me to court. She accused me of abandonment, said I'd humiliated her. It was harsh, but I didn't flinch. It was the same voice I'd lived with for years. But as I scrolled, the tone shifted. The anger gave way to uncertainty. The all-caps shouting turned into lowercase questions. "Where are you? Are you okay? Can we talk?" I kept reading. In one email, she wrote that the mortgage company had begun sending warnings, that the house was at risk of foreclosure. She said she was working 2 jobs just to keep things afloat. She had sent Riley and the kids back to her hometown because her words, they weren't helping. It wasn't the logistics that hit me. It was the realization that for the first time she was seeing the storm she'd been living in. In one message, she admitted, "I think I finally understand why you were always so distant. I just didn't want to see it." Another one read, "I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me things were falling apart." Then came the one that stopped me cold. She wrote, "I never signed the divorce papers. They're still sitting in the kitchen drawer. I open it sometimes just to stare at them. I guess part of me hoped you'd come back not to fix things, just so I could say I'm sorry." She didn't ask me to return, not directly, but her words, carefully chosen this time, felt different. Sincere, less defensive, more aware. The kind of awareness that only comes when the noise fades and you're left alone with your own part in the story. I closed the laptop and just sat there staring into the quiet. I wasn't angry. I wasn't moved to tears. I didn't feel the pull of nostalgia or the warmth of some rekindled flame. What I felt was clarity. She understood now. But understanding doesn't rewind time. Regret doesn't repair broken trust. And missing someone doesn't always mean you're meant to have them back. I had waited years to hear those words. And now that I had, they didn't change the fact that I was already gone mentally, emotionally, and finally physically. Sometimes people only learn the lesson after the cost has been paid in full. It happened at a coffee shop on the edge of Bristol Creek, a sleepy town I'd started visiting every couple of weeks for groceries and Wi-Fi. The barista had just called my order when I heard someone behind me say Jason. At first I didn't turn around. Common name. Could have been anyone. But then it came again, firmer, more certain. Jason Carter. I turned and there he was, Ryan, a mutual friend from my old life. His expression said it all. Shock, confusion, recognition. Man, I thought you were dead, he half-joked, eyes scanning me like he was trying to confirm I was real. We made awkward small talk. I kept it vague, needed space, had to reset the usual phrases you give people when you're not ready to explain what really happened. He didn't press, just said it was good to see me and left. I should have known that even a small ripple can echo loudly. Less than a week later, there was a knock at my cabin door. I peeked through the curtain and froze. Dana. She stood there with her arms crossed, not in anger but uncertainty. Her face looked thinner, eyes tired. She wasn't made up like before. Just a hoodie, jeans, and a look I hadn't seen on her face in years, humility. I opened the door, didn't say a word. She stepped forward, voice shaking. Please, don't close it. She didn't yell, didn't accuse, she just broke down. I'm sorry, she said between sobs. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. I didn't know I was losing you every day while I was trying to hold everything else together. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. She told me about the months after I left. The silence, the house falling apart. The moment she realized her sister had never left, I had. And only then did she understand the difference. When she finally finished, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I'll come back, I told her calmly. But only to finish this the right way. I'll sign whatever needs signing. We'll wrap this up as adults. Her eyes welled up again, but she nodded. She didn't try to change my mind. Didn't argue. There was no fight left in either of us, just the long shadow of a relationship that had expired long before the paperwork caught up. As she turned to leave, she looked back and whispered, I just wanted to say it to your face that I was wrong. I nodded once. That was all the closure I needed. Some reunions are for reconciliation, others are just for release. This was the second kind. They say people don't change, they just reveal themselves. I used to think that was harsh, but now I think it's just clarity dressed as truth. Because when I finally walked away, when I let go of the version of life I had clung to for too long, I realized something I wish I'd known sooner. Love on its own isn't enough. I spent years in a marriage slowly falling apart, and every time I felt ignored or disrespected, I made excuses. She's just tired. It's the stress. It'll get better. But better never came. And I kept shrinking in silence until there was nothing left of me that felt like me. The irony is that my absence did more than my presence ever could. It made Dana see, it made her listen. But by then I wasn't interested in being seen anymore. I had spent too many nights being invisible in a room full of people who called me family. She told me later that she replayed the last few months over and over. Wondered if there had been a moment she could have stopped the slow bleed. I think we all do that, rewrite the timeline in our heads, hoping there's an edit that doesn't end in silence. But real change doesn't begin when someone begs you to stay. It begins when they recognize why you had to leave. I wasn't perfect. I made my share of mistakes. I should have spoken up sooner, drawn lines earlier. But the man I was back then believed loyalty meant endurance, that if you love someone enough, you wait, you carry it, you stay. Now I know staying isn't noble when it costs you your peace. If you're watching this and you feel like you're fading into the background of your own life, ask yourself this. Are you staying because there's hope or because you're afraid to start over? And if you're the one taking someone for granted, assuming they'll always be there, no matter how you treat them, understand this. Some people don't leave with a bang. They leave quietly. They pack in silence. And by the time you notice their absence, they're already gone. I don't regret leaving. I regret how long it took me to believe I was allowed to. These days, my life is simpler, quieter, but more mine than it ever was before. I still wake up early, still drink black coffee, still take walks in the woods. But now every step feels like it's towards something instead of away from something. So if my story feels familiar to you, take it for what it is: not advice, not judgment, just a reminder. Sometimes love doesn't leave because it died. It leaves because it was never returned.